The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the stones of the old bridge were slick and dark. Elira gripped the carriage door with both hands, her knuckles pale, her heart pounding so loud she feared the guards standing nearby could hear it. The Alpha King was seated inside, his eyes fixed on a map spread across his knees, unaware that the woman closing his door was shaking with a truth she could not hold inside any longer. She leaned in, just for a moment, or just long enough to whisper 5 words that would change everything. "Someone is waiting beyond the bridge." Draven Castellan looked up sharply. His golden eyes, the eyes of an alpha born to rule, locked onto hers, with a force that made her breath catch. No servant spoke to him, unless spoken to first. No servant dared meet his gaze, yet here she was, doing both, and worse, she was warning him of danger she had no way of knowing. "What did you say?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it, the edge of a man who did not like surprises. Elira stepped back from the door, her hand still trembling at her side. She had not meant to speak. The words had risen in her throat like water breaking through a cracked dam, and once they were out, there was no pulling them back in. She opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to say anything that might undo the damage, but the convoy was already moving. The driver, unaware of the exchange, snapped the reins, and the wheels began to turn. "Wait," Draven called out, but his voice was lost beneath the sound of hooves striking wet stone. He turned to look back through the small window of the carriage, searching for the maid who had just spoken words no ordinary servant should know. She stood in the courtyard, growing smaller with distance, her white apron stark against the gray morning, her eyes still locked on the carriage, as though she were trying to send one more silent warning through the glass. Draven Castellan was not a man who believed in nonsense. He had ruled the Castellan pack for 6 years, since the sudden passing of his father, and in that time, he had learned to trust only what he could see with his own eyes, and measure with his own hands. Whispers, feelings, premonitions, these were things for old women and frightened children, not for an Alpha King traveling to secure peace with the Thornwood pack. And yet, something about the way the maid had spoken unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Her voice had not trembled with foolishness. It had trembled with certainty. He turned back to his map, forcing his mind to focus on the summit ahead. Relations with the Thornwood pack had been fragile for a decade, ever since a border dispute had left blood on both sides. Draven had spent the last 2 years quietly rebuilding trust, exchanging letters, sending gifts, extending invitations. Today was meant to be the final step, a meeting at neutral ground near the Eastern Bridge, where he and the Thornwood Alpha would sign an agreement that would end generations of tension. The convoy moved steadily through the misty countryside. Trees dripped with the recent rain, and the road ahead curved through a shallow valley before rising toward the bridge that marked the border between Castellan land and the neutral territory beyond. Draven's personal guard, 4 of his most trusted warriors, rode alongside the carriage, their eyes scanning the tree line out of habit rather than concern. There had been no threats reported, no signs of trouble, only a maid's whispered warning that Draven was trying, and failing, to shake from his mind. He thought of Elira's face as she had said the words. There had been no malice in her expression, no trickery, nothing that suggested she meant him harm. If anything, she had looked afraid, as though the warning itself frightened her more than whatever danger it described. Draven had seen many expressions of fear in his years as Alpha. Fear of punishment, fear of failure, fear of him. But this had been different. This had been the fear of someone who knew something they were not supposed to know. The carriage rattled over a rough patch of road, jolting Draven from his thoughts. Outside, the trees began to thin, and the gray shape of the old stone bridge came into view ahead, its arches rising over a narrow river swollen with days of rain. This was the halfway point of the journey, the last stretch of Castellan land before the neutral territory began. Draven had crossed this bridge dozens of times in his life, first as a boy accompanying his father, later as the Alpha King himself, and never once had anything unusual occurred here. But today, something felt different. He could not explain it. Perhaps it was Elira's words still echoing in his mind, planting a seed of unease that had not existed before. Perhaps it was simple coincidence, a trick of the light through the fog, or the particular stillness of the birds in the trees, which had gone eerily silent. Whatever the cause, Draven found himself gripping the edge of his seat, his senses sharpening, his wolf stirring beneath his skin, with a restlessness he could not ignore. "Something is wrong," he murmured to himself, and as the words left his mouth, the world around him erupted into chaos. The first sign was a sound, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping, except it came from directly ahead, near the bridge itself. Then came the shout of one of his guards, a warning cut short, as an arrow struck him from the shadows of the tree line. Draven's instincts took over instantly. He threw himself sideways in the carriage, as another arrow pierced the wooden frame just inches from where his head had been moments before. "Ambush!" one of the surviving guards bellowed, his voice cracking with urgency. The convoy scattered into motion, horses rearing in fright, warriors drawing their weapons as masked figures emerged from the trees on both sides of the road. Draven counted at least a dozen attackers, moving with the coordinated precision of trained fighters rather than common bandits. This was not a random attack. This had been planned, and planned well. He kicked open the carriage door and rolled out onto the wet ground, his body already shifting at the edges, fur rippling beneath his skin, as his wolf answered the call of danger. Around him, his guards fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered, and the masked attackers seemed to know exactly where to strike, as though they had studied every weakness in his convoy's formation. Draven rose to his feet, his transformation halted at the threshold between man and wolf, strength surging through his limbs. He caught the wrist of an attacker lunging toward him and twisted hard, disarming the man, before delivering a blow that sent him crashing into the mud. Another came from behind, but years of training had sharpened Draven's senses beyond ordinary limits, and he spun just in time to block the strike aimed at his back. The battle was brutal but brief. Whoever had planned this ambush had underestimated the skill of the Castellan guard, and one by one, the attackers began to fall back, retreating into the trees as quickly as they had appeared. Draven stood in the center of the road, breathing hard, his shirt torn and stained with mud, a shallow cut along his forearm, where a blade had grazed him in the chaos. Around him, his guards regrouped, checking each other for wounds, their expressions grim. "Your Highness," one of them said, kneeling briefly before rising again, his eyes scanning the tree line for any remaining threat. "Are you injured?" "A scratch, nothing more," Draven replied, though his mind was racing far beyond the physical wound. He looked toward the bridge, now empty and silent once more, the mist curling over its stones, as though nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. Someone had been waiting beyond the bridge, exactly as Illyra had said. The question that gripped him now was not whether the attack had been real, for the evidence of that lay scattered across the road in broken arrows and abandoned weapons. The question was how a maid, a servant with no connections to warriors, spies, or nobility, could have known an attack was coming before it happened. Draven ordered his guards to secure the area and prepare for the journey back to the Castellan estate. The summit with the Thornwood pack would have to wait. Something far more urgent now demanded his attention, something that had been standing quietly in his own household this entire time, closing carriage doors and carrying trays of tea, all while holding a secret that had very nearly saved his life. As the convoy turned back toward home, Draven found himself replaying every detail of that morning, searching for something he might have missed. He remembered the way Illyra had always kept her eyes lowered in his presence, the way she moved through the halls of the estate with a quiet, careful grace, never drawing attention to herself, never speaking unless necessary. She had served in his household for nearly 2 years, brought in as a replacement for an older maid who had retired to the countryside. In all that time, he had barely noticed her, barely exchanged more than a few words with her, a nod here, an instruction there. Now, that anonymity felt suspicious, not because he believed she meant him harm, for if she had wished him dead, she could have simply said nothing, and let the ambush unfold without warning. No, what troubled Draven was the implication of her knowledge itself. To know of an attack before it happened required either involvement in its planning, or something far stranger, something that defied the ordinary boundaries of what a person could know. The rain began to fall again, as the convoy made its way back through the valley, each drop striking the carriage roof like a small, insistent question. "Who are you, Illyra? What are you? And why did you choose to save my life today?" By the time the estate came into view, its tall gray towers rising above the tree line like sentinels against the darkening sky, Draven had made his decision. He would not simply dismiss this matter as coincidence, nor would he allow fear or suspicion to cloud his judgment before he understood the truth. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. The carriage rolled to a stop in the courtyard, the same courtyard where, Only hours before, Elira had whispered her warning and watched him ride away. Draven stepped down, his boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel, and looked up at the estate's main doors, already imagining the conversation that awaited him. His guards moved quickly to inform the household of the attack, their voices low and urgent as servants gathered in the entrance hall, murmuring among themselves in confusion and worry. Draven's eyes swept across the gathered faces, searching for one in particular. He found her near the back of the group, half hidden behind an older servant, her hands twisted together in front of her, her face pale with a fear that went beyond simple concern for his safety. She already knew what had happened. Somehow, she already knew. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. In her gaze, Draven saw something he had not expected. Not guilt, not deception, but a kind of desperate relief, as though she had spent the entire day terrified that her warning had not been enough, that he had ridden into danger and never returned. "Elira," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hall, silencing the murmurs of the gathered servants. "Come with me." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. Servants did not receive private audiences with the Alpha King, especially not after an incident as serious as an attack on his convoy. Whispers began immediately, speculation and confusion spreading through the hall like wildfire. But Draven paid them no mind. He turned and walked toward his private study, trusting that Elira would follow, though he could hear her hesitant footsteps behind him, slower than his own, weighted with dread. The study was quiet, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp, its shelves lined with books and maps that Draven rarely had time to read. He closed the door behind Elira once she entered, the sound of the latch echoing in the small room like the closing of some invisible trap. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Elira obeyed silently, lowering herself into the seat with the careful movements of someone who feared any sudden gesture might provoke anger. Draven remained standing, studying her for a long moment before he finally spoke. "You knew," he said simply. "This morning, when you closed my carriage door, you knew that men were waiting beyond the bridge to attack me. How?" Elira's hands tightened in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She said nothing, and the silence stretched between them, heavy and unbearable. Draven felt his patience thinning, not from cruelty, but from the desperate need to understand what had very nearly cost him his life. "I am not angry," he said, softening his tone slightly, though the authority in his voice remained. "I am alive because of what you told me. I owe you my life, Elira. But I cannot ignore what happened today, and I cannot protect this pack, or you, if I do not understand how you knew." Still, she remained silent, her breathing shallow, her fingers trembling against the fabric of her skirt. Draven crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level, his golden gaze steady and searching. "Please," he said, quieter now, almost pleading, "tell me the truth." Elira lifted her eyes to his at last, and in them, Draven saw not defiance, but terror, the terror of someone who had kept a secret so long, and so carefully, that speaking it aloud felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff. Whatever she was about to say, he understood in that moment that it would change everything he thought he knew about the quiet maid, who had, without warning, saved his life at the bridge. The lamp flickered gently between them, and outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the courtyard clean of the morning's danger, though the truth waiting inside the study had only just begun to surface. Draven remained crouched in front of her, waiting, though every instinct in him urged patience, even as urgency burned beneath his skin. Elira's lips parted, then closed again, as though the words refused to come easily, as though speaking them might summon some old danger she had spent years avoiding. "If I tell you," she finally whispered, "you will not look at me the same way again." "I already do not look at you the same way I did this morning," Draven said honestly. "You spoke words no servant should know, and because of them, I am alive. Whatever comes next cannot be worse than silence." Elira closed her eyes briefly, gathering courage from some deep hidden place. When she opened them again, there was a different quality to her expression, less fear, more resolve, as though she had finally decided that the truth, however dangerous, needed to be spoken. "My mother used to see things before they happened," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not always clearly, sometimes it was only a feeling, a pressure behind her eyes, a certainty that something was about to happen. Other times, she saw full moments, as clear as memory, except they had not occurred yet. She called it the sight. Her mother had it too, and her mother before that. Draven listened without interrupting, though his mind raced through the implications of what she was describing. He had heard old stories, passed down through generations of pack history, about a bloodline called the Seers, wolves and humans alike, who were said to glimpse fragments of the future. But those stories belonged to legend, to campfire tales told to frighten children, not to the modern world he governed. This morning, Elira continued, her hands finally steadying in her lap, I was folding linens near your study, when the feeling struck me so suddenly that I nearly dropped everything I was carrying. I saw the bridge, I saw the arrows, I saw you falling from the carriage, and I did not know if you rose again afterward. The vision ended before I could see the outcome. I only knew that if I said nothing, you might die, and I could not carry that possibility in silence. Draven straightened slowly, moving to lean against the edge of his desk, processing everything she had revealed. It was an extraordinary claim, one that defied everything he understood about the natural world, yet it aligned perfectly with the ambush that had occurred exactly as she described. The Seers, he said slowly, testing the word aloud, as though tasting something forbidden. I thought that bloodline had vanished generations ago. Elira's expression darkened, and for the first time, Draven saw something that looked almost like old grief pass across her face. It did not vanish, she said quietly. It was destroyed. My grandmother told me stories before she passed, stories about a time when Seers were valued, sought after by pack leaders for guidance and warning. But something changed. Fear took hold. Fear that a Seer's knowledge could be used against a pack rather than for it. Fear that with enough foresight, someone could seize power they were never meant to hold. Draven felt a chill settle over him. Though the room was warm, he knew this part of history, though only in fragments, whispered among elders who rarely spoke of it openly. Generations ago, under the rule of his own grandfather, an order had been passed against the Seer bloodline, accusing them of manipulation and deceit after a prophecy allegedly led to a devastating conflict between neighboring packs. Families were hunted, bloodlines erased, until the Seers were believed extinct entirely. You are the last, he said, the realization settling into him with quiet weight. You are the last surviving Seer, and you have been living here, in my own household, hidden among the servants. Elira nodded slowly. My mother made me promise, before she passed, that I would never reveal what I was. She said that if the wrong person discovered my gift, I would be hunted just as our ancestors were. So I hid. I took a position as a maid because it allowed me to remain unnoticed, to move through the world without drawing attention, to bury my visions so deeply that even I sometimes forgot they existed. But you did not bury this one, Draven said. No, Elira admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I could not. Not when it meant your life. The two of them sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her confession settling over the room like a heavy fog. Draven studied her carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that her story might be a carefully constructed lie, meant to manipulate him. But he found nothing of the sort, only the raw honesty of someone who had carried an enormous burden alone, for far too long. Why tell me at all? He asked finally. You could have remained silent this morning. You could have let events unfold without ever revealing yourself. Why risk everything to warn me? Elira met his gaze steadily this time, her fear giving way to something firmer, something that resembled quiet conviction. Because a pack without its alpha falls into chaos, she said. And because, whatever the old laws say about my bloodline, I could not stand by and let harm come to someone when I had the power to prevent it. That is not who my mother raised me to be. Draven found himself studying her with newfound respect. Though the situation remained fraught with danger, neither of them could ignore. If word spread through the pack that a Seer lived within the estate, especially one who had just revealed her gift so openly, the old laws his grandfather had established would demand her immediate punishment, regardless of the fact that her warning had saved his life. The elders will not be forgiving, he said grimly, if this becomes known. I understand, Elira said quietly, lowering her eyes once more, though this time it seemed less like fear and more like quiet acceptance of whatever consequences might come. I do not ask for mercy, Your Highness. I only ask that you understand I meant no harm by what I did. I only wish to protect you. Draven considered her words carefully, weighing the danger of what he now knew against the debt he owed her for his own survival. The easy path would be silence, allowing the matter to fade quietly, protecting himself from the complications of harboring a seer within his household. But Draven had never been a leader who chose the easy path over the right one, and something about Alira's honesty, her quiet courage in revealing a truth that could destroy her, stirred a sense of responsibility within him that he could not ignore. "I will not punish you," he said finally, his voice firm with decision. "You saved my life today, and whatever ancient laws my grandfather established, I am not bound to enforce cruelty against someone who acted only with good intention." Relief flooded across Alira's face, though it was tempered with lingering worry. "Thank you," she whispered, "but others may not share your mercy if they discover what I am." "Then we will ensure they do not discover it," Draven said, his mind already working through the practical challenges of protecting her secret. "For now, this remains between us. You will continue your duties as before, and I will investigate who orchestrated the attack at the bridge. Someone knew my travel plans in enough detail to plan an ambush at exactly the right location. That concerns me as much as the revelation of your gift." Alira nodded, grateful for the reprieve, though uncertainty still lingered in her expression. As she rose to leave the study, Draven found himself speaking again, unable to hold back a final question that had been forming in his mind throughout their conversation. "Alira," he said, and she paused at the door, turning back toward him. "Do your visions extend beyond moments of danger? Can you see other things as well?" She considered the question carefully before answering. "My visions are unpredictable," she admitted. "Sometimes they arrive with great clarity, showing me events with startling detail. Other times, they are only fragments, feelings without clear meaning, glimpses that I struggle to interpret until events unfold and I understand what I saw. I have little control over when or how they come to me." Draven absorbed this information thoughtfully, recognizing both the potential value and the inherent unpredictability of her gift. If her visions could warn of future dangers, they might prove invaluable in protecting the pack from threats both known and unforeseen. But if they were as uncontrollable as she described, relying on them too heavily could prove equally dangerous. "Rest tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow, we will discuss how best to move forward, both in protecting your secret and in uncovering who was responsible for today's attack." Alira nodded once more, before slipping quietly from the study, leaving Draven alone with his thoughts. He moved to the window, looking out over the darkened courtyard, where the rain continued to fall steadily, washing away the last traces of the day's chaos. Somewhere within his own pack, someone had known enough about his travel plans to arrange a precise and deadly ambush. That betrayal, whoever was responsible, posed a threat far more immediate and dangerous than the ancient secret of a seer's bloodline. As he stood there, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass, Draven found his thoughts returning again and again to Alira, to the quiet courage she had shown in revealing herself, and to the strange, unexpected admiration that had begun to take root within him. She had risked everything to save a life she had no obligation to protect, and in doing so, she had revealed not just a hidden gift, but a character of remarkable strength and integrity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers still lurked within the shadows of his own household, Draven knew that the woman who had closed his carriage door that morning was no longer simply a maid to him. She was something far more significant, though he could not yet fully articulate what that meant, and the uncertainty of it lingered in his mind, long after the lamp in his study finally burned low and extinguished itself in the quiet hours before dawn. News of the attack spread through the Castellan estate before the sun had fully risen the next morning. Servants whispered in corners, warriors gathered in the training yard with grim faces, and by the time Draven entered the great hall for his morning council meeting, the room was already thick with tension. 6 advisors sat around the long wooden table, their expressions ranging from concern to barely contained anger, and at the head of the group sat Corin, Draven's beta and closest friend since childhood, his jaw tight with frustration. "An ambush on Castellan land," Corin said the moment Draven took his seat. "Coordinated, precise, and clearly planned by someone with detailed knowledge of your travel route. This is not the work of wandering bandits, Draven. Someone wanted you dead, and they knew exactly how to try." "I am aware," Draven replied evenly, though his mind was elsewhere, still turning over the events of the previous evening, still weighing the secret he now carried about Alira's true nature. I want a full investigation. Every guard who knew the travel plans, every servant with access to my schedule, all of them must be questioned. One of the older council members, a stern woman named Odette who had served as an advisor since Draven's father ruled, leaned forward with sharp eyes. There is something you are not telling us, she said. Word has already reached my ears that you summoned a maid to your private study last night, alone, immediately after returning from the attack. Explain this, Alpha. The room fell silent, every eye turning toward Draven. He had expected this question eventually, though he had hoped for more time to prepare his response. Revealing Alira's gift now, before he understood the full scope of the danger surrounding her, could place her in immediate peril from a council that still honored the old laws against her bloodline. I questioned her because she made a comment before my departure that, in hindsight, suggested she may have overheard something relevant to the attack, Draven said carefully, choosing his words with precision. I wished to understand what she knew and how she came to know it. And what did you learn? Odette pressed, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. That she overheard servants gossiping about strangers seen near the border roads in recent days, Draven replied smoothly, the lie settling more easily than he expected. Nothing more substantial than rumor, but enough to warrant her concern. Corin studied his friend carefully, and Draven could see the flicker of doubt in his beta's expression, though Corin said nothing further on the matter. The two had grown up together, trained together, fought alongside each other in border skirmishes long before Draven ascended to the position of Alpha, and Corin knew better than most when Draven was choosing his words too carefully. Regardless of how the maid came to suspect trouble, Odette continued, the more pressing matter is identifying who orchestrated this attack. If someone within our own household provided information to outside forces, that person represents a far greater threat than any external enemy. Agreed, Draven said, grateful for the shift in conversation, away from Alira. I want a thorough review of everyone with access to my travel schedule, starting with the guards assigned to the convoy, and extending to household staff, who might have overheard planning discussions. The council spent the following hours deliberating over possible suspects, reviewing the movements of various pack members in the days leading up to the attack, and debating whether the Thornwood pack itself might bear responsibility, despite the peace summit that had been scheduled between the two territories. Draven listened carefully, contributing where necessary, though his thoughts kept drifting back to Alira and the precarious position she now occupied. As the meeting drew to a close, Corin lingered behind, after the other council members departed, closing the heavy wooden doors of the hall behind them, until only the two of them remained. Draven, he said quietly, I have known you long enough to recognize when you are hiding something. What really happened with that maid last night? Draven considered his old friend carefully, weighing the risks of confiding in him against the loneliness of carrying such a significant secret entirely alone. Corin had proven his loyalty countless times over the years, standing beside Draven through difficult decisions, dangerous battles, and the heavy burden of leadership itself. Yet the matter of Alira's bloodline was not simply a personal secret. It was a violation of ancient pack law, one that could implicate Draven himself in harboring a forbidden lineage if the truth ever surfaced. It is complicated, Draven admitted finally, and I am not yet ready to share the full details, even with you. I ask only that you trust me, as you always have, and allow me the space to handle this matter carefully. Corin studied him for a long moment, clearly unsatisfied with the vague response, but he nodded slowly, respect for his Alpha's judgment outweighing his own curiosity. I trust you, he said, but be careful, Draven. Whoever ordered that attack is still out there, and if there is more to this maid's involvement than you are revealing, it could place both of you in greater danger than you realize. After Corin departed, Draven remained alone in the great hall, staring at the empty chairs where his council had sat only moments before. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier than it did now, balancing the safety of his pack against the safety of a single woman whose extraordinary gift had saved his life at considerable risk to her own. He found Alira, later that afternoon, in the estate's kitchen gardens, kneeling among rows of herbs, her hands moving carefully as she gathered sprigs of rosemary and thyme for the evening meal. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, immediately rising to her feet and lowering her eyes in the deferential posture expected of household staff. Walk with me, Draven said quietly, and she followed him along the garden path, maintaining a respectful distance that felt somehow at odds with the intimacy of the secret they now shared. "The council suspects something," he told her, once they were far enough from the main house to speak freely. "Odette in particular seems unwilling to accept simple explanations. I told them you overheard rumors about strangers near the border, nothing more. But I do not know how long such a story will satisfy their questions." Elira's expression tightened with worry. "If they discover the truth—" "They will not," Draven interrupted firmly. "Not if we are careful. But I need you to understand the seriousness of our situation. Someone within this household, or with close ties to it, provided information that led to yesterday's attack. Until we identify who that person is, we must assume that anyone could be watching, listening, reporting details to enemies we have not yet identified. Do you believe the attack and my gift are connected somehow?" Elira asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Draven paused, considering the question seriously for the first time. "I do not know," he admitted, "but it troubles me that the timing feels significant. You revealed your warning on the very morning an ambush had been carefully planned. Either that is remarkable coincidence, or something deeper connects these events, something I have not yet uncovered." They walked in silence for several moments, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden path. Elira seemed to be wrestling with something internally, her expression shifting between hesitation and resolve, until finally she spoke again. "There is something else," she said quietly. "Since the vision at the bridge, I have felt a strange unease, a sense that more is coming, though I cannot yet see clearly what that might be. My visions have never worked this way before, arriving in fragments rather than complete pictures. It frightens me, Your Highness. I fear that whatever danger threatens you has not yet fully revealed itself." Draven absorbed this information with growing concern, recognizing that the threat facing his pack extended far beyond a single failed ambush. If Elira's fragmented sense of unease proved accurate, greater danger loomed on the horizon, danger that neither of them yet fully understood. "Then we must prepare as best we can," he said finally, "and trust that your gift will continue to guide us, even in fragments, toward whatever truth we need to uncover." As they returned toward the main house, Draven found himself increasingly aware of how much his perspective had shifted in the span of a single day. The quiet maid who had once existed at the periphery of his awareness had become central to his safety, his understanding of hidden dangers within his own household, and increasingly, to thoughts that extended beyond simple gratitude or practical necessity. There was something in her quiet strength, her willingness to risk everything for a truth she believed in, that stirred a respect within him unlike anything he had felt for another person in a very long time. Yet even as this new connection began to form between them, the shadow of unresolved danger lingered over the estate, the identity of the traitor still unknown, the source of the attack still shrouded in mystery, and Elira's warning of fragmented visions suggesting that whatever threatened them had only just begun to unfold. 3 days passed, and the investigation into the ambush yielded frustratingly little. Guards questioned every servant with access to the travel schedule. Warriors combed the border roads for signs of the attackers who had fled into the forest. Yet nothing concrete emerged to identify who had orchestrated the assault. Draven grew increasingly restless with each passing day, aware that whoever had planned the attack remained free, likely watching the estate, waiting for another opportunity to strike. During this time, Draven made a decision that surprised the entire household. He announced that Elira would be reassigned from general kitchen and cleaning duties to serve as his personal attendant, responsible for managing his private study, organizing his correspondence, and assisting with daily tasks that kept her in close proximity to him throughout each day. To the household staff, this seemed an unusual, but not unheard of promotion, the kind of arrangement that occasionally occurred when a servant demonstrated particular reliability or discretion. To the council, however, the decision raised immediate concern. "You cannot be serious," Odette said during the following council meeting, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Elevating a common maid to such a position of proximity, immediately following an assassination attempt, when questions still linger about her possible knowledge of the attack itself? This appears reckless, Draven, even for you." "I disagree," Draven replied calmly, though internally he recognized the delicate balance he was attempting to maintain. "Keeping her close allows me to monitor her directly, to verify that she poses no threat, and to benefit from whatever additional information she might provide as the investigation continues. This is a practical decision, not a reckless one." Corin remained quiet during this exchange, though his eyes lingered thoughtfully on Draven, clearly still turning over unspoken suspicions about the true nature of his alpha's interest in the maid. After the meeting concluded, he approached Draven privately once more. "You are protecting her," Corin said, not as a question, but as a statement of growing certainty. "This is not about monitoring a potential threat. This is about protecting someone you have already decided is not one." Draven met his friend's gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying the observation, though his silence spoke clearly enough. Corin studied him for a long moment before shaking his head slowly, a mixture of concern and reluctant acceptance crossing his features. "Whatever this is," Corin said finally, "be careful, Draven. The old laws exist for reasons that predate both of us. If there is more to this maid than simple loyalty, and the Council discovers it before you are ready to reveal it yourself, the consequences could extend far beyond her own safety." The warning lingered in Draven's mind throughout the following days, as Illyra settled into her new responsibilities. She proved remarkably capable, organizing his correspondence with careful attention to detail, managing his schedule with an efficiency that surprised even him, and maintaining the discretion necessary to avoid drawing further suspicion from the Council. Yet beneath the practical arrangement of her new duties, something else was quietly developing between them. An ease of conversation, a growing comfort in each other's presence, that neither of them had anticipated. One evening, as Illyra organized a stack of correspondence on his desk, Draven found himself watching her with an attention that extended beyond simple curiosity about her gift. She moved with quiet grace, her expression focused and calm despite the danger that continued to surround her secret, and something about her steady composure in the face of such uncertainty struck him as remarkable. "You seem troubled," Illyra observed, glancing up to find him watching her. "Is something wrong, Your Highness?" "I was thinking about how differently I see you now, compared to 2 weeks ago," Draven admitted, surprising himself with his own honesty. "I barely noticed you before, if I am being truthful. You moved through this household so quietly that I rarely gave you a second thought." Illyra's cheeks flushed slightly at the admission, though she maintained her composure. "That was intentional," she said. "I learned long ago that survival often depends on remaining unnoticed. Drawing attention, even positive attention, carries risks that people like me cannot afford. And yet you drew my attention anyway," Draven said quietly, "by choosing to speak that morning, despite the risk to yourself." "Some risks are worth taking," Illyra replied, meeting his gaze steadily, "even for someone who has spent her entire life avoiding them." The moment stretched between them, charged with an awareness that neither had fully articulated, but both clearly felt. Draven found himself drawn toward her in ways that extended far beyond gratitude for saving his life, an attraction rooted in genuine respect for her courage, her intelligence, and the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive as the last of a persecuted bloodline, while maintaining her compassion for others. "Illyra," he said softly, "may I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her expression at the shift in his tone. "Do you regret revealing your gift to me?" he asked, "even knowing the danger it places you in, even with the uncertainty of what comes next?" Illyra considered the question carefully before answering. "There are moments when fear grips me," she admitted honestly, "when I imagine what might happen if the Council discovers the truth, or if word spreads beyond this household to those who might seek to harm someone like me. But no, I do not regret it. For the first time in my life, I do not have to hide everything about myself from someone who matters to my safety and well-being. That freedom, however dangerous, feels worth the risk." Draven felt something shift within him at her words, a recognition that their relationship had evolved into something far more significant than either had initially anticipated. He was no longer simply an alpha protecting a valuable asset, and she was no longer simply a maid who happened to possess an extraordinary gift. Something deeper had begun to take root between them, born from mutual trust, shared danger, and a growing appreciation for qualities in each other that neither had expected to find. Yet even as this connection deepened, the unresolved threat of the ambush continued to loom over the estate. Investigations yielded little progress. Suspicious glances from council members grew more frequent, and Illyra's earlier warning of fragmented, unclear visions suggesting greater danger ahead weighed heavily on both their minds. Whatever peace had settled temporarily over the household felt increasingly fragile, a calm that both of them sensed would not last indefinitely. Late one night, as Draven reviewed reports from his border patrols, searching for any sign of the attackers who had escaped into the forest, Alira entered his study with a tray of tea, her movements slower than usual, her expression distracted. "Is something troubling you?" Draven asked, setting aside his reports to study her more carefully. "I felt something earlier," she said quietly, setting the tray down with hands that trembled slightly. "A pressure behind my eyes, similar to what preceded my vision of the bridge, but this time, no clear image accompanied it. Only a feeling of unease, a sense that danger continues to circle closer, though I cannot yet see its shape." Draven rose from his desk, moving toward her with genuine concern. "What do you believe it means?" "I do not know," Alira admitted, frustration evident in her voice. "My gift has never worked this way before, offering feelings without clarity, warnings without direction. It frightens me more than a clear vision would, because I do not know how to prepare for a danger I cannot properly see." Draven placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, an act of comfort that felt natural despite the boundaries that technically separated an Alpha King from his household staff. "Whatever comes," he said firmly, "we will face it together. Your gift has already saved my life once, and even fragmented, I trust that it will continue to guide us toward the truth we need to uncover." Alira looked up at him, something vulnerable and grateful passing across her expression, and for a moment, the careful distance they had maintained between duty and genuine affection seemed to blur entirely. Neither spoke further, though the silence between them carried a weight of unspoken understanding, an acknowledgement that whatever danger lay ahead, they would face it not as alpha and servant, but as two people who had come to matter deeply to one another in the span of a few short, extraordinary days. The unease that had settled over Alira in the days following her fragmented warning did not fade, but instead grew steadily more pronounced, manifesting in restless nights and moments of sudden distraction during her daily duties. Draven noticed the change immediately, watching as she paused mid-task, her eyes distant, her hands trembling slightly before she caught herself and returned to whatever work occupied her. One morning, nearly a week after the ambush, Alira collapsed suddenly while carrying a stack of documents into Draven's study, her body going rigid before she crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide open but unseeing, fixed on something only she could perceive. Draven rushed to her side immediately, catching her before she struck the ground, his heart pounding with alarm as he called her name repeatedly, receiving no response. For nearly a full minute, Alira remained locked in whatever vision had seized her, her breathing shallow, her body trembling with the intensity of whatever she was witnessing. Draven held her carefully, resisting the urge to shake her from the trance, remembering vaguely from old stories that interrupting a seer mid-vision could sometimes cause harm rather than help. Finally, her eyes refocused, blinking rapidly as awareness returned, and she gasped as though surfacing from deep water, her hands gripping Draven's arms tightly as she steadied herself. "What did you see?" Draven asked urgently, helping her into a nearby chair as her breathing gradually calmed. Alira's expression was troubled, confusion and fear mingling as she tried to process what she had witnessed. "Betrayal," she said finally, her voice shaking. "Someone close to you, someone you trust deeply, is not who they appear to be. I saw shadows, conversations in hidden corners, plans forming against you, but I could not see faces clearly enough to identify who was involved." Draven felt a chill settle over him at her words, his mind immediately racing through the small circle of people he trusted most implicitly: Corin, his beta and oldest friend, Odette and the other council members, advisors who had served his family for years. Surely none of them could be capable of such betrayal, yet Alira's vision suggested otherwise. "Are you certain?" he asked, though he already trusted her gift enough to know the question was somewhat rhetorical. "I am certain that betrayal exists within your closest circle," Alira said firmly, "but I could not determine specifically who is responsible. The vision remained frustratingly incomplete, showing me enough to warn you, but not enough to provide clear answers." Draven paced the length of his study, his mind working through the implications of this new warning. If someone within his inner circle was indeed conspiring against him, it would explain how the attackers at the bridge had known his exact travel route with such precision. It would also mean that the danger facing him and Alira both extended far beyond a single failed ambush, representing an ongoing threat that could strike again at any moment, from a source he least expected. "We must proceed carefully," he said finally, turning back to face her. If I confront my council members directly without evidence, I risk alerting the true traitor to hide their involvement more effectively. We need proof, something concrete that identifies who among my trusted circle has betrayed us. How do we find such proof? Alira asked, without revealing that we suspect betrayal at all. Draven considered the question carefully, already forming the beginnings of a plan. We watch carefully, he said. We pay attention to small details, inconsistencies in behavior, unexplained absences, conversations that seem carefully guarded. And perhaps, he added, glancing toward her with new consideration, your gift might provide additional guidance, even if it comes only in fragments. Over the following days, Draven began observing his council members and closest advisors with newfound scrutiny, searching for any sign that might reveal the traitor within his midst. He noticed little at first, the ordinary rhythms of pack governance continuing much as they always had, meetings conducted, decisions debated, daily business handled with apparent normalcy. Yet gradually, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Corin, usually punctual and reliable, arrived late to 2 consecutive council meetings without adequate explanation. Odette, normally vocal and assertive in discussions, grew notably quieter whenever conversation turned toward the ongoing investigation into the ambush, as though she preferred the matter be resolved quickly and without excessive scrutiny. Neither observation proved definitive, but together, they raised questions that Draven could not easily dismiss. Meanwhile, Alira continued experiencing fragmented visions, brief and incomplete glimpses that provided frustratingly limited information. She saw hands exchanging sealed letters in dim candlelight, though she could not identify whose hands they belonged to. She saw a map spread across an unfamiliar table, markings indicating locations she did not recognize, though something about the terrain felt disturbingly similar to the border regions near Thornwood territory. She saw conversations conducted in hushed tones, words she could not quite discern, though the tone carried unmistakable notes of conspiracy and calculation. Each fragment added to the growing picture of betrayal within the Castellan pack, yet none provided the definitive proof Draven needed to act decisively. The frustration of partial knowledge weighed heavily on both of them, the awareness that danger continued circling closer, while they remained unable to identify its precise source or timing. One evening, as Draven reviewed correspondence with Alira assisting nearby, she suddenly stiffened, her hands pausing over a stack of letters she had been organizing. Her eyes fixed on a particular envelope, her expression shifting from concentration to alarm. "This letter," she said slowly, lifting it carefully as though handling something dangerous. "I feel something significant when I touch it, a connection to what I have been seeing in my visions." Draven took the letter from her, examining the seal and handwriting carefully. It bore Corin's personal seal, addressed to a contact within Thornwood territory, ostensibly discussing routine diplomatic matters related to the upcoming rescheduled summit between the two packs. "This appears entirely ordinary," Draven said, though unease had already begun settling in his stomach at Alira's reaction. "Perhaps," Alira replied, though her expression remained troubled. "But something about it connects to what I have been sensing. I cannot explain it fully, only that this letter, or perhaps its intended recipient, holds significance beyond its apparent content." Draven studied the letter more carefully, searching for anything unusual in its wording or phrasing, though nothing immediately stood out as suspicious. Yet Alira's reaction, combined with the growing pattern of small inconsistencies he had observed in Corin's recent behavior, planted a seed of doubt that Draven found increasingly difficult to ignore. Could his oldest friend, the beta who had stood beside him through countless challenges over the years, truly be involved in the betrayal Alira's visions had warned of? The possibility felt almost unthinkable, yet the evidence, however circumstantial, continued accumulating in ways that Draven could no longer dismiss as coincidence. "We need more information," Draven said finally, setting the letter aside carefully, careful not to alert anyone that it had drawn particular attention. "I will find a way to investigate Corin's recent activities more thoroughly, without arousing suspicion that we consider him a potential threat." Alira nodded, though worry remained evident in her expression. "Be careful," she said quietly. "If your suspicions prove correct, and Corin discovers that we are investigating him, the danger to both of us could increase significantly." Draven met her gaze steadily, recognizing the truth in her warning, yet feeling resolved to uncover whatever betrayal threatened his pack. regardless of how painful the truth might prove to be. "Whatever we discover," he said firmly, "we will face it together, just as we have faced everything since that morning at the bridge." As the days continued passing, the investigation into Corin's activities proceeded quietly. Draven reviewing correspondence records, tracking his beta's movements through the estate, and paying closer attention to conversations that had once seemed entirely unremarkable. Meanwhile, Illyra's visions continued arriving in fragments, each piece adding incrementally to a picture that remained frustratingly incomplete, yet increasingly troubling in its implications. The bond between Draven and Illyra continued deepening throughout this period of uncertainty, their shared danger and mutual trust, forging a connection that extended far beyond their original circumstances. Yet even as their relationship grew stronger, the shadow of impending betrayal loomed increasingly large over the estate, both of them aware that whatever truth waited to be uncovered would likely arrive with consequences neither could fully anticipate. Draven's quiet investigation into Corin's activities proved more difficult than he anticipated, complicated by the genuine friendship and trust that had defined their relationship for over 2 decades. Every instinct urged him to simply confront his old friend directly, to ask honestly whether the suspicions taking root in his mind held any truth. Yet the stakes were too high for such directness, and if Corin truly bore no responsibility for the ambush, an accusation without proof could damage irreparably the bond they had shared since childhood. Instead, Draven began quietly reviewing records of correspondence sent through official pact channels, cross-referencing dates and recipients against the timeline of events surrounding the ambush. He discovered that Corin had sent several letters to contacts within Thornwood territory in the weeks preceding the attack, ostensibly related to preparations for the diplomatic summit, though the frequency and secrecy surrounding these communications struck Draven as unusual compared to typical diplomatic correspondence. Meanwhile, Illyra continued experiencing fragmented visions that gradually painted an increasingly clear, if still incomplete, picture of the conspiracy unfolding around them. One evening, while organizing documents in Draven's study, she suddenly paused, her hand hovering over a particular ledger containing records of recent pack expenditures. "There is something here," she said, her voice carrying the particular quality of certainty that had come to signal an emerging vision. She opened the ledger carefully, running her fingers down columns of numbers until she stopped abruptly at an entry that seemed, on its surface, entirely mundane. "This payment," she said, pointing to a line item describing funds allocated for border security improvements, "connects to what I have been sensing. I do not understand the specific significance yet, but this expenditure feels deeply tied to the danger surrounding us." Draven examined the entry carefully, noting that it had been authorized by Corin himself, allocating a substantial sum towards strengthening border patrols near the Eastern Territories, precisely the region where the bridge ambush had occurred. On its surface, the expenditure seemed entirely reasonable, even prudent, given recent security concerns. Yet something about the timing, authorized just days before the attack, raised uncomfortable questions in Draven's mind. Could Corin have used these funds to pay the attackers directly? Draven wondered aloud, voicing the troubling possibility that had begun forming in his thoughts. Disguising payment for an assassination attempt as legitimate security spending. "I do not know the specific mechanism," Illyra admitted, "but the connection feels undeniable. Whatever role this expenditure played, it links directly to the conspiracy I have been sensing." Draven felt a heaviness settle over him at this mounting evidence against his oldest friend. He remembered countless moments throughout their shared history, battles fought side by side, difficult decisions debated late into the night, the unwavering loyalty Corin had demonstrated time and again as beta of the Castellan pack. The possibility that this same friend might now be conspiring against him felt almost impossible to accept, yet the evidence continued accumulating in ways that grew increasingly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. That night, unable to sleep, Draven found himself walking the quiet corridors of the estate, his mind turning over the mounting evidence against Corin, while simultaneously searching for any alternative explanation that might exonerate his friend. He eventually found himself standing outside Illyra's small quarters, near the servant wing, hesitating before knocking softly on her door. She answered quickly, still fully dressed despite the late hour, as though she too had been unable to find rest that night. "Your Highness," she said, surprise evident in her expression. "Is something wrong?" I could not sleep, Draven admitted, feeling somewhat foolish, standing in the corridor at such an hour, yet unwilling to retreat now that he had already knocked. I needed to think through everything we have discovered, and I found myself wanting company while I did so. Illyra stepped aside, allowing him to enter her modest quarters, sparse but neatly maintained, a small collection of personal items, arranged carefully on a simple wooden shelf. Draven glanced around briefly, before returning his attention to her, noting the quiet dignity with which she had constructed a life for herself, despite the constant fear of discovery that had shadowed her existence. "Do you truly believe Corin is responsible for the attack?" Draven asked, sitting in the single chair her small room offered while she perched on the edge of her narrow bed. Illyra considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe the evidence points strongly in his direction," she said honestly. "But I also understand how difficult this must be for you, questioning the loyalty of someone who has stood beside you for so many years." "He was like a brother to me," Draven said quietly, the admission carrying weight beyond simple friendship. "We grew up together, trained together, fought together in countless battles before I ever became Alpha. If he has truly betrayed me, I do not know how I will reconcile that truth with everything I believed about our friendship." Illyra reached out tentatively, placing her hand over his in a gesture of comfort that felt entirely natural despite the boundaries that technically separated them. "Whatever the truth proves to be," she said gently, "you will not face it alone. I promise you that." Draven looked up at her, something shifting within him at her words, at the quiet strength and compassion she consistently demonstrated, despite her own precarious circumstances. In that moment, sitting together in the quiet intimacy of her small room, the careful distance they had maintained between Alpha and servant seemed to dissolve entirely, replaced by a connection that had grown organically from shared danger, mutual respect, and genuine affection that neither of them had anticipated when this journey began. "Illyra," he said softly, "these past weeks have changed everything I understood about my own life. You saved me at that bridge, yes, but you have given me something beyond simple survival. You have shown me courage I did not know existed, strength forged through circumstances that would have broken many others, and a compassion that persists, despite every reason you might have to protect only yourself." "You give me too much credit," Illyra said, though her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "I am simply someone trying to survive, trying to do what feels right, despite the danger surrounding every choice I make." "That is precisely what makes you remarkable," Draven replied, his hand tightening gently around hers. "Survival alone would have kept you silent that morning at the bridge. Yet you chose to speak, to risk everything, because protecting others mattered more to you than protecting yourself. That is not simple survival, Illyra. That is genuine courage." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feeling that had been building steadily since that first whispered warning at the carriage door. Neither moved to close the remaining distance between them, yet the connection felt undeniable, a recognition that whatever had begun as circumstance had grown into something far more significant, something that neither of them fully understood yet, but both were increasingly unwilling to deny. "Whatever happens with Corin," Draven said finally, rising to return to his own quarters as the late hour demanded, "whatever truth we uncover about the conspiracy threatening this pack, I want you to know that you have become far more important to me than simply the person who saved my life. I do not yet know what that means for either of us, given the complications of position and circumstance that separate us, but I wanted you to understand the truth of my feelings before we face whatever challenges lie ahead." Illyra watched him go, her own heart racing with emotions she had spent years learning to suppress, yet found impossible to deny in this moment. Whatever danger awaited them in confronting Corin's suspected betrayal, whatever consequences might follow from the deepening connection between herself and the Alpha King, she recognized that there was no returning now to the careful anonymity she had maintained for so long. The path forward, however uncertain, led only onward, toward truths that would reshape not just the fate of the Castellan pack, but the course of her own life entirely. 3 days after their late-night conversation, Illyra experienced the most powerful vision she had encountered since the warning at the bridge. It struck her without warning, while she carried a tray of documents through the estate's central corridor, her body suddenly going rigid as the world around her dissolved into images far clearer and more detailed than anything she had witnessed before. She saw Corin standing in a dimly lit chamber she did not recognize, speaking urgently with a figure whose face remained frustratingly obscured. though the emblem visible on his cloak marked him unmistakably as a representative of the Thornwood pack. Corrin's expression carried none of the warmth or loyalty Draven had always associated with his beta, replaced instead by cold calculation, as he discussed plans that made Alira's blood run cold even in the disconnected clarity of vision. The council gathering, Corrin's voice echoed through the fragmented images, provides the perfect opportunity. With enough of our warriors positioned strategically, and the confusion of a large gathering to mask our movements, we can eliminate Draven and position ourselves to claim leadership before anyone realizes what has occurred. The vision showed maps spread across a table, marking specific locations throughout the Castellan estate, timing details for an upcoming pack gathering scheduled to celebrate the harvest season, a tradition that brought together warriors, council members, and citizens from across Castellan territory in a single location. Alira watched in horror as the fragmented images revealed a coordinated plan far more ambitious and dangerous than the failed bridge ambush, one that would strike during a moment of maximum vulnerability, when Draven's guard would be relaxed amid the celebratory atmosphere of the gathering. The vision released her as suddenly as it had begun, leaving Alira gasping on the corridor floor, documents scattered around her, several servants rushing to her aid with concerned expressions. She waved away their assistance as quickly as she could manage, insisting she simply needed a moment to recover from sudden dizziness, before hurrying toward Draven's study with an urgency that overrode any pretense of composure. She found him reviewing reports with two of his warriors, and without regard for their presence, she interrupted immediately. "Your Highness, I need to speak with you, now, privately." Something in her tone and expression conveyed the seriousness of the situation, clearly enough that Draven dismissed his warriors immediately, closing the study door behind them, as Alira began recounting everything she had witnessed in vivid, urgent detail. "Corrin is planning to eliminate you during the harvest gathering," she said, her voice shaking with the intensity of what she had seen. "He is working directly with Thornwood forces, coordinating an attack that will occur when the estate is filled with celebrating pack members, using the chaos and crowds to mask their movements, until it is too late for anyone to intervene effectively." Draven felt the full weight of this revelation settle over him like a physical blow. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence he had gathered over recent weeks, some part of him had continued hoping that his oldest friend would prove innocent, that some alternative explanation might emerge that did not require confronting such a profound betrayal. Yet Alira's vision, more detailed and specific than anything she had previously experienced, left little room for doubt. "The harvest gathering occurs in 4 days," Draven said, his mind already racing through the implications of this timeline. "We must prepare carefully, without alerting Corrin that we know of his plans, while ensuring the safety of everyone who will attend the celebration." "How do we proceed?" Alira asked, her own fear evident, despite the steadiness of her voice. "If Corrin realizes we suspect him before the gathering, he may accelerate his timeline, or change his approach entirely, making it even more difficult to anticipate and prevent his plans." Draven paced his study, considering their limited options carefully. Direct confrontation risked alerting Corrin prematurely, while continuing to act as though nothing had changed, risked allowing the coordinated attack to proceed as planned, potentially costing many lives beyond his own, if Corrin's forces struck during a moment when the estate was filled with vulnerable citizens. "We need allies we can trust absolutely," Draven said finally. "Warriors and council members whose loyalty remains beyond question, who can help us prepare defenses without alerting Corrin to our suspicions. I believe I know who among my inner circle has remained genuinely faithful throughout this crisis." Over the following 2 days, Draven carefully approached select warriors and council members individually, testing their reactions to hypothetical scenarios about potential threats during the upcoming gathering, gauging their responses for any sign of foreknowledge or complicity. Gradually, he identified a small group he felt confident remained entirely loyal, including Odette, whose earlier quietness during investigation discussions he now realized had stemmed not from involvement in the conspiracy, but from her own private suspicions about Corrin, that she had been reluctant to voice without concrete evidence. "I suspected something troubling about Corrin's behavior for weeks," Odette admitted quietly, when Draven finally confided his suspicions to her directly. "But I lacked proof, and accusing the beta of treachery without solid evidence would have been dangerous for us both, particularly if my suspicions proved incorrect. I am relieved you have found clarity on this matter, even as I am heartbroken to learn the truth." Together, this small circle of trusted allies began quietly preparing defenses for the harvest gathering, positioning loyal warriors strategically throughout the estate grounds, establishing signals that could alert defenders to trouble without revealing their preparations to Corin or his co-conspirators, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios that Alira's vision, despite its clarity, had not fully detailed. Throughout these preparations, Alira continued experiencing smaller, less intense visions that provided additional fragments of useful information, confirming details about troop movements, likely attack points, and the approximate timing Corin intended to execute his plans. Each fragment added to their growing strategic advantage, though the underlying tension of preparing to confront someone who had once been considered family weighed heavily on Draven throughout the process. "I keep searching for some alternative explanation," Draven admitted to Alira one evening, as they reviewed final preparations together in his study. "Some way that Corin's actions might be explained by something other than genuine betrayal. But I find none. The evidence is simply too overwhelming to ignore any longer." "I am sorry," Alira said softly, understanding the particular pain of confronting betrayal from someone so deeply trusted. "I know how difficult this must be, discovering that someone you considered family has chosen a different path entirely." "The difficulty is not simply personal," Draven replied. "It is the recognition that if Corin, my closest friend and most trusted advisor, could conceal such deception for this long, I must question my own judgment in trusting others. How many other betrayals might exist within my circle, hidden as skillfully as this one has been?" Alira reached for his hand, offering comfort through simple physical presence, rather than words that felt inadequate to address such profound uncertainty. "Not everyone deceives," she said quietly. "I have not deceived you, and neither has Odette, nor the other allies who have proven their loyalty through this crisis. Betrayal exists, yes, but so does genuine faithfulness, even when it becomes difficult to distinguish between the two." Draven squeezed her hand gratefully, drawing strength from her steady presence, even as the harvest gathering approached with all its uncertain danger. Whatever confrontation awaited them, whatever painful truths would finally surface regarding Corin's betrayal, he found himself facing the coming days with renewed determination, bolstered by the trusted allies who had rallied around him, and the remarkable woman whose gift had first revealed the danger threatening his pack, and who now stood beside him as they prepared to confront it directly. The morning of the harvest gathering arrived with clear skies and a gentle autumn breeze. The estate grounds transformed overnight into a festive display of colorful banners, long tables laden with food, and gathering spaces prepared to welcome hundreds of pack members from across Castellan territory. To any observer, the scene appeared entirely peaceful, a celebration of community and abundance that had continued unbroken for generations. Yet beneath this festive surface, Draven and his small circle of trusted allies remained tensely alert, watching for any sign that Corin's planned betrayal might begin unfolding. Alira moved through the gathering in her official capacity as Draven's attendant, though her true purpose involved remaining alert for any additional fragments of vision that might provide crucial warning about the timing or specific nature of the impending attack. She had experienced nothing further since her detailed vision 3 days prior, and the uncertainty of not knowing exactly when Corin intended to strike weighed heavily on her as she moved among the celebrating crowds. Corin himself appeared throughout the morning entirely as expected, greeting pack members warmly, participating in traditional harvest ceremonies, offering no outward sign that anything unusual occupied his thoughts. Draven watched his old friend carefully throughout these interactions, searching for any crack in the composed facade, any indication that betrayal lurked beneath such convincing normalcy. He found nothing definitive, though the very perfection of Corin's performance struck him as unsettling in its own right. As afternoon approached, the gathering reached its peak, hundreds of pack members filling the estate grounds for the traditional harvest feast, the atmosphere filled with laughter, music, and the particular warmth that came from community celebration. It was precisely the kind of chaotic, crowded scene that Alira's vision had indicated Corin intended to exploit, and Draven felt every instinct sharpening with heightened alertness as the moment of potential danger approached. Then, without warning, Alira gasped beside him, her hand gripping his arm suddenly, as her eyes unfocused, another vision seizing her even amid the crowded celebration. Draven guided her quickly toward a quieter corner near the estate's main entrance, shielding her from view as the vision took hold, her body trembling with the intensity of whatever she witnessed. When she finally returned to awareness, her expression carried unmistakable urgency. "Now," she gasped. "It begins now. Warriors are moving into position near the eastern gardens, and Corin is heading toward the main gathering hall to create a distraction that will draw your guards away from the true point of attack." Draven immediately signaled to Odette and the small circle of trusted allies, who had been watching for exactly this moment, their prearranged signals activating a quiet but swift mobilization of loyal warriors throughout the estate grounds. Within moments, defenders moved into position near the eastern gardens, intercepting the infiltrating Thornwood warriors before they could establish themselves for their planned assault. The confrontation that followed unfolded with startling speed, loyal Castellan warriors engaging the infiltrators in the gardens while Draven himself moved swiftly toward the main gathering hall, determined to confront Corin directly before his old friend could execute whatever distraction he had planned. He found Corin exactly as Alira's vision had indicated, standing near the hall's entrance, his expression shifting rapidly from calculated calm to genuine shock as he realized his plans had already been discovered and countered. "Draven," Corin said, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and something that might have been genuine regret, though Draven could no longer trust such expressions from someone who had proven capable of such elaborate deception. "This is not what it appears to be." "Do not insult me with denials," Draven replied, his voice hard with the pain of confirmed betrayal. "I know of your dealings with Thornwood forces, Corin. I know of the ambush at the bridge, and I know of your plans to eliminate me today, using this celebration as cover for your treachery." Corin's expression hardened, recognizing that further denial served no purpose. "You do not understand the full picture," he said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. "The old ways, the traditions your family has maintained for generations, they weaken us, Draven. Alliance with Thornwood, true alliance, not the fragile peace you have been negotiating, would strengthen both packs against threats that neither of us can currently withstand alone. I did what was necessary for the greater good of our people, even if it required sacrifices you were unwilling to make yourself." "Sacrifices that included my own life," Draven said coldly, "and the lives of countless others who would have been caught in the chaos of your planned attack today." Before Corin could respond further, warriors from both sides began pouring into the hall, the confrontation in the eastern gardens having concluded with the successful capture of the infiltrating Thornwood forces. Corin's expression shifted rapidly from defiance to calculation as he recognized his position had become untenable, his carefully planned betrayal now fully exposed before witnesses who would ensure the truth reached every corner of the pack. In a final desperate act, Corin lunged toward Draven, apparently intending either to fight his way free or to attempt one final strike against his former friend before the situation could be fully contained. Draven, prepared for such a possibility, met the attack directly, the two former friends engaging in a brief but intense struggle that drew gasps from the gathered witnesses, who had begun crowding into the hall entrance, drawn by the commotion. The fight ended quickly, Draven's superior position, and the intervention of loyal warriors, overwhelming Corin's desperate resistance within moments. As guards restrained the former beta, Draven stood breathing heavily, staring down at the man who had once been like a brother to him, now revealed entirely as a traitor, whose ambitions had nearly cost countless innocent lives. "Take him to secure confinement," Draven ordered, his voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil churning beneath his composed exterior. "He will face judgment before the full council, with all evidence of his betrayal presented openly, so that every pack member understands the truth of what nearly occurred here today." As guards led Corin away, his expression a mixture of defiance and something that might have been genuine regret for the friendship he had ultimately betrayed, Draven turned to find Alira watching from nearby, her own expression reflecting the emotional weight of everything that had just transpired. He moved toward her immediately, relief flooding through him at seeing her safe amid the chaos that had briefly threatened the entire gathering. "You saved countless lives today," he said quietly, taking her hands in his own, without regard for the witnesses who watched their interaction with evident curiosity. "Your gift, your courage in sharing what you witnessed, prevented a tragedy that would have devastated this pack far beyond the loss of my own life." "We saved them together," Alira replied, her voice trembling slightly with the lingering intensity of the vision and the danger that had just been narrowly averted. "Your preparation, your trust in allies who proved genuinely loyal, made all the difference in ensuring my warnings translated into effective action. Around them, the gathered crowd began processing the dramatic events that had just unfolded, whispers spreading rapidly, as witnesses shared what they had seen with others, who had missed the confrontation directly. Draven recognized that maintaining Alira's secret would become increasingly difficult now, given the public nature of her collapse, and subsequent urgent warning that had clearly prevented disaster. Yet in this moment, surrounded by the relief of surviving a dangerous confrontation, and the deep gratitude he felt toward the woman who had made such survival possible, concerns about secrecy felt secondary to the simple reality of having faced grave danger together, and emerged, against considerable odds, still standing. In the days following Corin's capture, and the failed uprising at the harvest gathering, the Castellan estate buzzed with rumors and speculation, though the truth of what had occurred spread quickly enough through the accounts of the many witnesses who had gathered near the main hall during the confrontation. Word of Alira's collapse, and her subsequent urgent warning, which had directly enabled the successful defense against Corin's coordinated attack, could no longer be contained within the small circle who had previously known of her extraordinary gift. The council convened an emergency session 3 days after the incident, demanding answers regarding both the full extent of Corin's betrayal and the mysterious nature of the maid whose timely warning had prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. Draven stood before his assembled advisors, Alira beside him rather than positioned among the household staff, a deliberate choice meant to signal the significance of her role in recent events. "The maid's warning saved this pack from devastating losses," Odette said, addressing the assembled council, with the authority of someone who had witnessed firsthand the accuracy and value of Alira's gift. "Whatever questions exist about the nature of her abilities, we cannot deny the truth that her courage and foresight prevented tragedy, on a scale we can barely comprehend." Yet not every council member shared Odette's willingness to accept Alira's role without deeper scrutiny. An elder named Bartholomew, one of the few remaining advisors who had served during the reign of Draven's grandfather, rose with visible tension in his expression. "The old laws exist for reasons," he said firmly. "If this woman possesses the sight, as rumors now suggest, we cannot simply overlook generations of established precedent regarding such abilities, regardless of the assistance she has provided." "The old laws were established out of fear and misunderstanding," Draven replied, his voice carrying the authority of his position, combined with genuine conviction, earned through weeks of first-hand experience with Alira's character and abilities. "My grandfather's decree condemned an entire bloodline based on the actions of individuals whose true intentions we can no longer fully verify. Alira has demonstrated nothing but loyalty and courage since her gift first manifested in service of protecting this pack. I will not perpetuate injustice against her simply because tradition demands it." The debate continued for hours, council members weighing centuries of established precedent against the undeniable evidence of Alira's positive contribution to the pack's safety. Alira herself remained largely silent throughout much of the discussion, though when finally invited to speak directly to the council, she addressed them with a quiet dignity that seemed to shift the tenor of the remaining debate. "I understand the fear that led to the laws against my bloodline," she said, meeting the gathered council members' eyes steadily. "Foresight without wisdom can indeed be dangerous, used to manipulate rather than protect. But I ask you to judge me not by the mistakes of ancestors I never knew, but by my own actions. I risked everything to warn your alpha of danger, not once but multiple times, expecting nothing in return beyond the simple hope that my warning would prevent harm to those I had come to care for deeply. If that demonstrates the character your ancient laws feared, then perhaps those laws were mistaken from their very foundation." Her words carried weight that even the most skeptical council members found difficult to dismiss entirely, and gradually, the tenor of debate shifted from questioning whether her gift represented inherent danger, toward discussing how the ancient laws themselves might require reconsideration, in light of everything that had occurred. Bartholomew remained the most resistant to change, clinging to tradition even as evidence mounted against the wisdom of maintaining such prejudicial restrictions, yet even his opposition gradually softened as the practical benefits of Alira's continued presence within the pack became increasingly undeniable. As the council session finally concluded, without full resolution but with clear movement toward reconsidering the ancient restrictions against seers, Draven felt a measure of relief at having navigated this critical juncture without immediate danger to Alira's safety. Yet even as one crisis resolved, another concern occupied his thoughts increasingly: the question of Corin's fate and the formal judgment that awaited his former friend. The trial, when it finally convened, proved a somber affair. Evidence of Corrin's betrayal, presented methodically before the full council, and gathered representatives of the pack. Documents recovered from his private quarters confirmed extensive correspondence with Thornwood conspirators, detailed plans for the harvest gathering attack, and clear evidence linking him directly to the initial ambush at the bridge that had first revealed Elira's extraordinary gift. Corrin offered little defense throughout the proceedings. His earlier justifications about strengthening the pack through alliance with Thornwood forces, ringing increasingly hollow, as the full scope of his betrayal became apparent. When finally given opportunity to speak before judgment was rendered, he addressed Draven directly, his expression carrying genuine remorse, mixed with lingering conviction, regarding his original motivations. "I believed I was protecting our people from threats you refused to acknowledge," Corrin said quietly. "I still believe the alliance I sought would have strengthened us against dangers that traditional diplomacy cannot address. But I recognize now that the methods I chose, the betrayal of your trust, the endangerment of innocent lives during the harvest gathering, these were unforgivable, regardless of whatever noble intentions I convinced myself justified them." Draven listened to his former friend's words with complicated emotion, recognizing genuine conviction, mixed with catastrophic misjudgment, loyalty to some abstract vision of the pack's future, that had ultimately manifested as betrayal against the very people that vision claimed to protect. The council's judgment, when finally rendered, sentenced Corrin to permanent exile from Castellan territory, his position and privileges stripped entirely, though his life was spared in recognition of years of previous loyal service that had preceded his eventual betrayal. As Corrin departed the estate under guard, beginning his journey into permanent exile, Draven found himself standing alone in the courtyard, watching his former friend disappear beyond the gates for what would likely be the final time. The weight of loss, of a friendship destroyed by choices he still struggled to fully comprehend, settled heavily upon him, tempered only by the knowledge that justice had been served, and the pack protected from further danger. Elira found him there sometime later, the courtyard empty save for his solitary figure, and she approached quietly, offering comfort through simple presence, rather than words, that felt inadequate to address such complicated grief. "It is difficult," Draven said finally, "mourning someone who betrayed you so completely, yet still recognizing the genuine friendship that existed before ambition corrupted his judgment entirely." "Grief does not require simple explanations," Elira replied gently. "You can mourn the friend you lost while still recognizing the necessity of the judgment rendered against the traitor he became. Both truths can exist simultaneously, however uncomfortable that complexity feels." Draven turned to face her, drawing strength from her steady presence, as he had come to do so consistently throughout the recent weeks of crisis and uncertainty. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing beside me through all of this, for your courage in sharing warnings that saved countless lives, and for helping me navigate truths I would have struggled to face alone." "We faced it together," Elira said, echoing words she had spoken before, though this time carrying additional weight, given everything they had endured together since that fateful morning at the bridge. "Whatever comes next, I hope we continue facing challenges together, rather than separately." Draven studied her carefully, recognizing in her words an invitation to address the deepening connection between them, that recent crises had only strengthened, rather than diminished. "I would like that very much," he said softly, reaching for her hand with a gesture that felt both natural and significant, given everything their relationship had already weathered. "More than you likely realize." As the autumn sun began setting over the Castellan estate, casting long golden shadows across the courtyard, where danger had so recently threatened everything Draven held dear, he found himself looking toward the future with cautious optimism. Grateful for the remarkable woman beside him whose courage and gift had transformed not just his understanding of danger and betrayal, but his entire perspective on trust, loyalty, and the possibility of genuine connection, despite circumstances that might have kept them forever separated by position and tradition. Winter arrived early that year, dusting the Castellan estate with a light frost that transformed the courtyard gardens into a landscape of quiet, glittering beauty. In the months since Corrin's exile and the resolution of the council's debate regarding Elira's bloodline, the pack had settled into a period of gradual healing, the wounds of betrayal slowly closing, as new patterns of trust and governance took root under Draven's continued leadership. The council, After extensive deliberation that stretched across several sessions following the trial, ultimately voted to formally repeal the ancient laws condemning the seer bloodline, recognizing that the fear and prejudice underlying those restrictions had caused far more harm than any actual danger the seers themselves had ever represented. Bartholomew, the elder who had most strongly resisted this change, eventually offered his support, after witnessing firsthand the genuine character Illyra had demonstrated throughout the crisis, acknowledging that tradition alone could not justify perpetuating injustice against someone who had proven herself entirely loyal and courageous. With the old laws formally abolished, Illyra no longer needed to hide the truth of her nature, and word of her gift spread throughout Castellan territory, met with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and gratitude from pack members, who understood the crucial role her warnings had played in preventing catastrophic loss of life. She continued serving as Draven's closest advisor, her role evolving naturally from attendant to something far more significant, as their relationship deepened publicly, alongside the private connection that had been building steadily since that fateful morning at the bridge. Draven found himself increasingly drawn to formalize what had grown between them, recognizing that the woman who had once closed his carriage door as a quiet, unnoticed maid had become the person whose presence he valued above all others, whose counsel he sought on every significant decision, and whose company brought him genuine happiness that extended far beyond simple gratitude for saved life. He chose to propose during a quiet evening walk through the estate gardens, the same gardens where Illyra had once tended herbs in careful anonymity, hoping to remain unnoticed by a world that had once threatened her very existence. Now, standing among frost-covered plants beneath a clear winter sky, Draven knelt before her with a small ring, crafted from silver, and set with a single sapphire, its blue depths reminiscent of the eyes that had first captured his attention that fateful morning. "Illyra," he said, his voice carrying the same sincerity that had characterized every significant conversation between them since her extraordinary gift first revealed itself. "You entered my life as a maid, closing a carriage door, offering warning of danger I could not have anticipated. Since that moment, you have become far more than simply someone who saved my life. You have become the person whose wisdom I trust most completely, whose courage inspires my own, and whose presence brings genuine joy to circumstances that might otherwise feel overwhelming. Would you honor me by becoming not just my closest advisor, but my life partner, ruling alongside me as we continue building a future for this pack together?" Tears filled Illyra's eyes as she absorbed the significance of his proposal, remembering the terrified young woman, who had once believed her gift would only ever bring danger and isolation, never imagining that it might instead lead toward genuine connection and acceptance from someone whose position and power could have easily led toward exploitation rather than respect. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "1,000 times yes. From that morning at the bridge until now, everything about our journey together has led toward this moment, and I could not imagine facing whatever future awaits us with anyone other than you beside me." Their wedding, held the following spring as the estate gardens burst into vibrant bloom, drew pack members from across Castellan territory, curious to witness the union between their Alpha King and the remarkable woman whose gift had saved him from betrayal not once but multiple times throughout the preceding months. The ceremony itself remained relatively simple, reflecting both Draven's preference for authenticity over excessive formality, and Illyra's own comfort with modest celebration rather than elaborate spectacle, though the joy radiating from both participants made the occasion memorable regardless of its understated nature. In the months following their marriage, Illyra's role within pack governance continued expanding naturally, her unique gift providing valuable insight during council discussions, her warnings helping prevent several smaller conflicts before they could escalate into serious threats. Yet beyond her practical value as a seer, pack members increasingly recognized and respected her genuine wisdom, compassion, and dedication to protecting not just Draven himself, but the well-being of every citizen under Castellan governance. 1 year after the initial ambush at the bridge, Draven and Illyra returned to that same location together, no longer accompanied by guards or urgent business, but simply choosing to revisit the place where their extraordinary journey had first begun. The bridge itself looked unchanged, its ancient stones still marking the boundary between Castellan territory and neutral lands beyond, yet the meaning it held for both of them had transformed entirely from a place of near tragedy into a symbol of the remarkable partnership that had emerged from that dangerous morning. "Do you ever regret speaking that warning?" Draven asked, echoing a question he had posed months earlier, during the early days of their relationship, though now asked with the perspective of everything they had subsequently built together. Illyra considered the question with a smile, taking his hand as she gazed out over the flowing river beneath the bridge, its waters catching the golden light of the setting sun. "How could I regret the moment that led toward everything I now cherish most deeply?" she said. "Yes, that warning brought danger and uncertainty, forced revelations I had spent years avoiding, and led toward confrontations I could never have anticipated. But it also led me here, standing beside you, no longer hiding who I truly am, surrounded by a pack that has learned to value rather than fear my gift, and married to someone whose partnership brings me genuine happiness every single day." Draven squeezed her hand gently, his own heart full with gratitude for the unexpected path that had led from a moment of desperate warning toward a partnership that had transformed not just his own life, but the future trajectory of his entire pack. The old prejudices that had once condemned Illyra's bloodline had been replaced by genuine appreciation for the wisdom and protection her gift provided. The betrayal that had once threatened everything he valued had been overcome through resilience and the loyalty of true allies, and the quiet maid who had once closed his carriage door in nervous anonymity had become his queen, his closest confidant, and the person whose presence made every challenge feel surmountable. As the sun continued setting over the bridge that had once represented such profound danger, now transformed into a symbol of their shared journey and enduring partnership, Draven and Illyra stood together, looking not backward toward the difficulties they had overcome, but forward toward whatever future awaited them, confident that whatever challenges might arise, they would face them exactly as they had faced everything since that fateful morning, together, with courage, with trust, and with a bond that had proven strong enough to overcome betrayal, prejudice, and danger alike.